Listen, Thursday night, we already know Ravens at Chiefs, AFC Championship rematch. And Josh, with the Kansas City Chiefs seemingly in the head of Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar is 1-4 lifetime in his career against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Is this already a must win for Baltimore, at least psychologically?
I would say yes. Um, and not I would say it's not just a must win for Baltimore, but kind of a must win for the rest of the AFC. And let me explain what I mean. Because Patrick Mahomes has basically become like the boogeyman. Like, if you want to get to the Super Bowl in the AFC, you have to go through Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. It doesn't matter if it's in your stadium or if it's in Arrowhead. You have to go through Kansas City. And Joe Burrow has and Tom Brady have, have basically been the only two quarterbacks who have been able to get through Mahomes to either reach and win a Super Bowl or at least reach a Super Bowl in the case of Joe Burrow. So for Thursday night, I would say it's not just a must win for Baltimore, but it's a must win for the rest of the AFC, if you
Well,
get where I'm coming from.
a little bit, but I'll say this. So, Kansas City, I want to flip to the other side of the ball real quick. Kansas
Go
City,
ahead.
they have two games in the AFC North to start the season. They are hosting the Ravens, and in week two, they are hosting Cincinnati. And if you watched our NFL predictions last week, you know that I believe that that is an AFC championship game preview. If the Chiefs make it out of both those games 2-0, the NFL is in a whole lot of trouble. Those are two very hard games to start the year. I don't think they're going to do that. I think if they beat Baltimore, they probably lose to Cincinnati. I think if they lose to Baltimore, they'll probably beat Cincinnati. I think this is 100%. I don't know about if you lose, your season's over for Baltimore because you still got Lamar Jackson and those, pieces on both sides of the ball. But psychologically, if you're Baltimore, you have a bad taste in your mouth from last year's AFC Championship game where you held the Chiefs to 17 points. I don't even remember. I think it was the Kansas City did not even score in the second half of that game, and they
I'm
still
pretty sure you're right.
and they still won the game. Remember, there was that weird play where Baltimore was down. I think it was 17-3. I could be a little wrong on the score, but it was like going into the fourth quarter, and Zay Flowers fumbled the ball at the goal line, or it would have changed the entire portion of the game. That is something that Baltimore now mentally is going to have to overcome. Because I'll tell you this, what's going to be mentally troubling for the Baltimore Ravens will be if Lamar Jackson plays his arse off. He does his typical 275 throwing, rushes for 50 yards, plays a lot better than he did in the AFC Championship game, and they still lose. Whether it's by a touchdown, a field goal, a safety, they get blown out. However it is, they lose. If Lamar Jackson plays well and the Chiefs win, Baltimore's in trouble. If Lamar Jackson plays horrible and the Ravens still lose, it'll be like, oh, Lamar, he can't play well against good teams. He struggled against Buffalo in his career. He has struggled against Pittsburgh in his career. He has struggled against Kansas City. So now I think you look at, will the addition of Derrick Henry make a big impact for them on the offense side of the ball in this game? We know the Chiefs have one of the hardest training camps in the NFL with Andy Reid. We know their starters maybe played more of the preseason than any other team. We know Baltimore starters barely played. What will that factor bring to the table? But I just think the Ravens have to play with urgency. If they lose by a field goal and they don't play their best game, I don't think it's the end of the world. But if they look sloppy or Lamar does not look good, then yes, there could be ramifications for this game because as I've been preaching and I preached last week on our prediction show, the NFL is not linear. You don't get better year to year to year. Some years you're better than others, some years you're worse than others. Every year, week one is a different animal. Teams don't play in preseason anymore. week one is basically a crapshoot, but there's a lot of pressure here on the Ravens to get over that proverbial hump.
Yeah. Um, it like I was saying on our predictions show last week, it's the Ravens defense that I'm really interested in. Think about it. They lost Patrick Queen to their biggest rival in the Pittsburgh Steelers. They lost their defensive coordinator, Mike McDonald, to the Seattle Seahawks, where he's now the head coach. And they have some other holes on that defense. So but we know Baltimore's always had a great defense. Are they going to continue having that this season? Or can Kansas City maybe expose some holes on that side of the ball?
No, that's a good point, right? Because they go from Mike McDonald, who again revamped that secondary last year. He's now the head coach in Seattle. To Zach Orr, who was on the Ravens staff, but he is the youngest defensive coordinator in football, and his first assignment is going to be going up against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, who are going to have McCall Hardman. For everything I've read, they're going to have Rashid Rice. Travis Kelsey is still going to be there. You have the rookie Xavier Worthy. And you know Andy Reid in September. We know how good Andy Reid is in December. Well, Andy Reid's just as good in September. Andy Reid always comes out with new tricks to begin the year, and Steve Spagnuolo is going to have the defense playing well like he did right out of the gate last year. Is Baltimore, and John Harbaugh is a very good coach, but is Baltimore going to be prepared for the wrinkles that Kansas City will throw in? Because I promise you they will.
Yeah. Um, and Kansas City won't even have Marquise Brown for this game. If I'm pretty
Oh,
sure.
that's a good point. You're right. No, you are right on that.
So that is a key offensive piece that's out for Kansas City. But again, you mentioned it. They're still going to have Xavier Worthy. They're still going to have Travis Kelsey. They're still going to have Rashid Rice, even though I don't agree with that decision for him to be out on the field. But that's a whole nother story. Um,
Don't forget about Juju Smith Schuster coming over.
yep, Juju is back, and we know what he did when he was with Kansas City originally.
And you got Pacheco in the running game.
Exactly. So it's like you have all these weapons for Patrick Mahomes to play with. And then you look over at Baltimore, other than Derrick Henry and Mark Andrews, I guess, and you have basically three weapons when you look at Baltimore's offense outside of Lamar Jackson. You have Zay Flowers, you have Mark Andrews, and you have Derrick Henry.
I'd throw Rashad Bateman in there.
I feel like he needs to have like he had a good season last year. I want to see him do it again before I
Duvernay is another decent receiver. So,
you you do make a valid point, but it's like I wouldn't say Duvernay and Bateman are established weapons
okay.
quite yet. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say they're established weapons in the same vein as like a Juju Smith-Schuster or a Marquise Hollywood Brown.
Maybe in that Kansas City system. I mean, I would probably take Duvernay over Juju if it wasn't in a Kansas City system with Patrick Mahomes, my quarterback.
Okay, you, you know what? That's a fair assessment there. Like maybe someone we saw that Juju was not the same wide receiver when he was in New England.
Well,
And
it's New England. I mean, come on.
okay, fair. But like McCole Hardman, the guy who ended up catching the game-winning touchdown
Like
pass.
he barely could see the field for the Jets. Comes back to Kansas City, and it goes back to coaching in this league. Uh,
Exactly. That's my point, though. Is like when you're in that Kansas City system, you kind of look better than you're supposed to. It's kind of like when got, you had wide receivers nobody had heard of playing in New England, and you're like, who's this guy? And he's making big catches for Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. You know what I mean?
yes. Let's make a prediction on this game, Josh. You got Ravens or you got Chiefs?
I gotta go with the Chiefs in this one. They're the defending champs. They're at home. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think this game, though, is going to be a little bit like the AFC Championship games in terms of I don't think it's going to be too high scoring. I think it's going to be like a 24-21 type game. Kansas City is favored by 2.5 to 3, depending on which betting market you look at, which to me is about right. They could win by a touchdown, I suppose, but I think it's going to be pretty close and low scoring for that.
I could see it being like a 24-21 type game, maybe.
Well, speaking of must win, the Friday night game streaming on Peacock in Brazil, which who knows why the hell the NFL is even having this game in Brazil. If you've been seeing what's been going on in Brazil during the past few days when it comes to the wildfires, and now they have, this whole charade going on with Elon Musk and X. There's not going to be any tweets in the press box. And Eagles players and Packers players have both said they've been told to not go into their hotel room. So this thing seems like a mess. But to answer the question on the screen for my Philadelphia Eagles, I do think this game needs to be a sense of urgency. It needs to be a sense of turn the corner. And again, you're higher on the Packers. We know this year than I am. Um, I think that this Eagles team is going to be really good this year, and I do think it starts Friday night. I think Jalen Hurts needs to set a tone. I think Saquon Barkley is going to have a big running game in this game because I think Kellen Moore is going to want to feature Saquon Barkley and his new toy, a guy that we have never seen with this many white boxes we at least hope for in terms of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and the weapons Philadelphia has on the outside. I think you're going to see guys like Bryce Huff on the defensive line, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter really show that youth movement. The Eagles secondary now, Quinyon Mitchell is going to get a lot of rotating snaps. You have Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay, Kiwi Ringo, Isaiah Rogers. They're more deep in the secondary than they were a year ago. I think it's going to take a little bit of time for that Vic Fangio defensive scheme to implement, which is why I think Green Bay will have some success moving the football down the field. I think this is going to be a close, down to the wire game. I think Philadelphia, again, I think they need to show some stuff. I do think they need to win this game psychologically, getting over what happened at the collapse of last year. And I'm just going to say it. I got Philly, but I think it's close. I'll go a little bit more high scoring than the game on Thursday night. I'll go 27-24. Philly favored by 2.5. They barely cover.
Okay, so I've seen some talking heads in the media saying there's a potential the Eagles could miss the playoffs entirely. I don't know if you've seen that at all, but
I have.
okay. I'm sure you don't agree with that. And I believe both of us had the Eagles winning this division when we made our prediction
We
special
both
last
did.
week.
Yes, we both had them at 12-5, and we both had them. Well, you had them as the 3. I had them as the 2.
Okay. And I have the Packers in the playoffs. I believe you did not.
I did not. That was the team I had just missing the playoffs.
Okay. Which I think that's a fair assessment for you. You weren't as high on what you saw from Jordan Love because you felt like it was too small of a sample size, which I'll give you this. Maybe I bought a little too much into the hype. We'll have to see how it plays out this season because, now that teams had a whole offseason, they can adjust their game plans on how they want to play against Jordan Love.
As well as I know from a year ago, we saw, the Eagles fly high in 2022, 2023. They immediately, week 1, New England and Bill Belichick made the change. They're going to play 2-eye safety. They're going to force Jalen Hurts to make a read post snap. Like you have said, teams now have film on Jordan Love. And I like Matt LaFleur. I think he's a very good offensive coach. But we will see what wrinkles Green Bay has to throw in because here's the thing that I think Philly has the advantage of in this game. They don't just have one new coordinator, they have 2. And it's not like Baltimore where they're sort of keeping the same scheme. At least offensively, this will be a completely different scheme than what the Philadelphia Eagles ran a year ago.
That's brings up an interesting question for me, and I want your opinion. So, knowing that the Eagles are going to be running a completely different offensive system and defensive system this season, what film do you think the Packers have been watching this week? Like, are they watching stuff that Kellen Moore has run in both Dallas and Los Angeles? Are they watching film of what Vic Fangio did in Miami? Like,
I'll tell you for sure they're watching film of what Vic Fangio did in Miami because the Vic Fangio defensive scheme has been pretty much implemented all over the league. Um, I will tell you that when it comes to the offense scheme, I think it's going to be a mix between what Sirianni slash Steichen ran in 2022 and what Kellen Moore did, really more with Dallas than with the Chargers. And the reason why I say that is because Justin Herbert was hurt last year. Remember, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen were hurt. The Chargers by the end of the year were falling by the wayside. I mean, how much scheme can you really watch of Easton Stick playing quarterback?
okay,
So,
that's fair. But I do have another question for you.
okay.
Does it and we'll get more into this when you and I do our uh, Browns Eagles video collaboration later in the season. But does it concern you that Kellen Moore was first in Dallas, then he went to LA, now he's on his third different team? Does that aspect concern you at all?
No, I get why people are saying the way that they are. That Dallas did get better technically when Kellen Moore left, and the Chargers fell apart. But I will say this, as I've said about Kellen Moore, in his defense, we all knew Brandon Staley was a terrible head coach, and I don't think that Jim Harbaugh was going to want to keep Kellen Moore as his guy. So I think that was sort of inevitable that he was going to leave the Chargers after that last season. Again, the thing, Dak, did he get better under Mike McCarthy? Yes, he threw for more yards. Yes, the stats were better, but it wasn't like Dak had bad years with Kellen Moore either. I mean, he was very good in that Kellen Moore system and, put up, very good numbers. And I think that Kellen Moore is a very good offensive coordinator. And again, I think he's going to bring something different to this Philadelphia Eagles team. I think it's going to be more motion, more to get the ball out quick, more calculated shots. I think they're going to move Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown a lot more than them standing at always at the X for A.J. Brown and the Z for Devontae Smith. So that is one thing that I do like. Again, could it take some time? Yes. I think it could be a little bumpy early. I think there's going to be some kinks they're going to have to work out in this game against Green Bay. But I think over time, Kellen Moore will prove to be a very good, confident offensive coordinator.
Okay, fair. But when you look at the NFC, it's gonna. I feel like the NFC East is gonna come down to Philadelphia and Dallas. Maybe Washington is somewhat in the mix. You have them making the playoffs. I do not. Um, and I'll give you credit for that. You believe more in Jaden Daniels. I just think he's gonna have a bit of a rookie season, and I don't love the Washington defense and stuff other than their defensive line. So I think that's going to be more of their Achilles heel. But it's like you look at the overall NFC picture. You've got San Francisco, you got Detroit, you got Philly, Dallas is in the mix, Green Bay, Chicago, Atlanta, Tampa Bay. There's all these teams, and there's only 7 spots. So this game could have a big impact, even though it's only week 1.
It's one of the things I love about the NFL. We always talk about, because I tell you this all the time. In basketball, the first week of the regular season or whatever, even though, let's say, it's a big, what's this go, Mavericks Nuggets. Let's say it's an NBA Finals, or excuse me, let's go Mavericks Celtics. Let's say it's an NBA Finals rematch. Well, it's game 1 of 82. It really has no merit. In the NFL, you have 17 games, and 70 to 75% of the league is probably in that 8 or 9 or 9 and 8 range. So Yeah, week one, it's week one. You're going to iron out the kinks. You're going to get better as the season goes on. But the games absolutely matter.
And there's going to be some games where I think there's more of an emphasis on them. Like, for example, the Dolphins Browns game late in the season, there's a reason that game is, as of right now, scheduled to be on Sunday Night Football because that game could possibly have major playoff implications.
When we went over the schedule when it got released in May, I'm pretty sure I remember telling you this on air. I have never seen an NFL schedule, at least when it comes to primetime games, more balanced in my life. And that is a credit to the NFL, it's a credit to the networks, and it's a credit to the teams. I have went through the Thursday night schedule, the Sunday night schedule, the Monday night schedule. There are very few games, in my opinion, that will have the opportunity to be flexed.
Yeah, I think there are some games.
But
I
I
think,
feel like we say that every year, and the game we all think is going to be one of the greatest games of the year has a 4-12 team versus a 5-8 team.
yeah, I know like they have Bengals Giants on Sunday Night Football, I think. So that game could get flexed. But let's circle back to like Packers Eagles. I would say this is a little bit more of a must win actually for the Green Bay Packers because
Whoa.
and the reason I'm saying that is because, you know, I was high on the Packers this past season as we've been talking about. It's up to the Packers to kind of come out in week 1 against a team that was in the Super Bowl just a couple seasons ago and really should have beaten the Chiefs in that Super Bowl. But it's
You have to remind me.
I sorry. But my point though is this. Like everybody's high on the Packers. I've seen some people saying they're going to win the division over the Detroit Lions, all this and that. This is a must win for the Packers to kind of justify that and say, yeah, we are here to stay. Like last year was not a one off.
Speaking of games and teams that need a win, both these two teams coming up, they could potentially be going in opposite directions depending on this game. It's a big game, Josh. The New York Jets, Aaron Rodgers, pretty much a year in his return on Monday night. Of course, to that game at home against the Bills last year where he tore his Achilles, he comes back to take on a Niners team who all of a sudden does have Brandon Ayuk and does have Trent Williams.
Yes. And think about this. In his first game back, who is Aaron Rodgers going against? The same guy who he got injured against on Monday Night Football last year. I believe Leonard Floyd is with the 49ers now.
Oh, that's an interesting element that I never even thought about.
Yeah. So, how's that going to play psychologically in Aaron Rodgers' mind?
Well, it's an ayahuasca mine, so I don't even know if Aaron Rodgers realizes it or cares about it.
He might be in the dark right now.
This, this is an interesting game. And again, you know that on this show, at least, more on Brandon's world, just because of our nature, and I know that you don't love talking spreads a lot. I don't bring up spreads a ton on this show, but I think it's significant to talk about this spread because when this game first came out, the San Francisco 49ers were favored by 6. That line in May has now come pretty much all the way down in half. It went back up to 4 today because of the Trent Williams news, but it was down to 3.5. And I think there's a sense here, and we talked about it with San Francisco. They had a very noisy and distracted offseason. Did they get their deals done ultimately? Yes. But those guys were not practicing, and we know what's on the horizon this offseason, and that's paying Brock Purdy or moving on from Brock Purdy. You can't really do both. You want to keep the roster you have, you probably got to find a different quarterback. So there's a lot of pressure on the Niners. And if Aaron Rodgers flops with the New York Jets, then the Jets, everybody's getting fired. Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, Aaron Rodgers will probably go retire, and we'll never hear from him again.
Or he goes to the Minnesota Vikings.
which would be comical, just like Brett Favre did. Remember, Aaron hated Brett Favre for all those years, yet he literally has followed Brett Favre's career path. Um, with that being said, I think there's more pressure on the San Francisco 49ers to win this game because I have already penciled the Jets in to lose this game in May, and I thought the Jets could get off to a 5-2 or 6-2 start and be fine. If San Francisco, again, I think they'll be fine, but there will be more questions to me about the Niners moving forward. If they lose this game, there will be the New York Jets because the Niners are just a better football team.
I'm trying to look up the 49ers schedule because I want to see what they have following um, this game against the Jets. Like weeks. Okay, so they're at Minnesota, then they're at the Rams, then they host the Patriots, host the Cardinals, and then at Seattle.
So
That's
that's doable. I would say there's some tricky games in there. And Seattle is always tricky. Uh,
especially because that's on Thursday night football.
and they own the Rams. So, but again, who knows what the Rams are going to be this year? If Stafford can stay healthy. Arizona to me is a very sneaky game, like we talked about.
Yeah. Um, they also have Kansas City in mid October. And then you look at the Jets schedule. I'll pull that up. So they have the 49ers, then they're at the Titans,
That's
then
all.
then they host the Patriots, then they host the Broncos, and then they're at the Vikings in London, and then they come back and host Buffalo.
To me, worst case scenario there, that would be what, 5 games?
Uh,
Worst case scenario, they're 3-2.
yeah. The games I could see them losing in that stretch are at the 49ers, and I could see them losing at home to the Broncos.
I
But
couldn't. I cannot see them losing to Denver. I think the London games are weird. Who knows what the London games are? They're better than Minnesota. At Buffalo, they probably split with Buffalo, so I'll give Buffalo the win at home.
no, that game's in New
Oh,
Jersey.
it's in New Jersey. Okay, I would take the Jets then.
Okay. So, yeah. At Tennessee could be a bit of a tricky game, being that they'll be coming off of basically a short week where they have to come back from the West Coast.
Here's what I'll say: if the Jets lose to San Francisco, I will immediately bet them whatever the spread is against Tennessee. They will destroy Tennessee, even on a short week.
Coming
They will
back from the West Coast.
They will be angry, they will be mad, and they will play well. It's the bounce back theory. It happens every year.
Okay. Um, I've seen some people being high on the Titans, actually.
Yeah, I have a buddy of mine, big Commanders fan actually. Can you believe it? The one Commanders fan I actually like. He's pretty high on the Tennessee Titans. I don't buy him. You don't buy him. You have him worse record than New England. So
Yes. But anyway, so thinking about those two schedules, because I think that's a huge part of this game, I gotta say it's more important for the Jets because I would say their schedule is a little bit more favorable than the schedule we looked at for the
I
49ers.
agree with what I'm saying. It's not as important because they can lose this game and be fine.
And I understand that argument, but at the same time, if you win this game, then you you look at the rest of those games and you're like, okay, that's not as daunting. That's not as daunting. Like you feel better about yourself.
No, I agree with that though too. If the Jets win this game, there's a world out there they start 6-0.
Yeah,
And then you got your path. I'm not saying they're going to do it, but if the Jets win this game, there is a path out there where you are by the end of week 2 ahead of Kansas City and you are in the driver's seat for the #1 seed in the AFC, which, by the way, will matter.
yeah. I mean, again, the Jets' schedule is at San Francisco, at Tennessee, home against the Patriots, home against Denver, at Minnesota, home against Buffalo, at Pittsburgh on Sunday
Sunday
night.
night, I believe. Yep.
Yep. at New England, home against Houston on Thursday Night Football, at Arizona, home against Indianapolis on Sunday Night Football, home against the Seahawks, at the Dolphins, at the Jaguars, home against the Rams, at Buffalo, and then home against the Dolphins.
That's why it's important for them to take care of your Tennessees, your New Englands, your Minnesotas, and even I know you like Denver more than I do. I think Denver's going to be okay. I don't think they're going to be a 10-win team like you do.
Okay.
Um, so I have Denver at 7 wins. You have them at 10. Like that was one of our major differences in our predictions. You had Denver in second place in the AFC West, being
Yes,
the
and I
final
had the
playoffs.
I had the Broncos getting that final wild card spot. Um, but that Jets Jaguars game late in the season could be important in determining something in the AFC playoff picture.
I agree with you there.